I know no one expects their life to split open on an ordinary night. That's the thing about tragedy. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't give you a warning shot or a trembling in the air. It arrives quietly, disguised as routine. That night wasn't different from any other at first. I remember the glow of my lamp reflecting softly on the floor. I remember the faint hum of the heater turning on. I remember thinking about something mundane, maybe dinner, maybe tomorrow's plans, maybe nothing at all. And then, 3 knocks. Soft, hesitant, nearly apologetic. Knocks that felt like they came from someone who wasn't sure they deserved to be heard. I froze. Not because the sound was loud, but because something about it tugged at the deepest part of me. A place that recognizes danger before the mind understands it. I walked toward the door slowly, each step sinking heavier than the last. The hallway felt longer, the air thicker. My hand hovered over the doorknob for a second, just 1 second, but in hindsight, it felt like the moment right before a storm breaks open. And when I turned the knob and pulled the door wide, my entire world shifted. My sister, my twin, stood there under the dim porch light, barely recognizable. Her hair was messy, clinging to her damp cheeks. Her lips trembled as if the cold had gotten under her skin. But it wasn't the cold. It was fear. It was exhaustion. It was something far darker. Tears had carved uneven lines down her face, and her breathing came in shallow, ragged pulls. She looked like she had been running, not just physically, but emotionally. Running from something that chased her deep into the night. She stumbled forward, and I barely caught her before she collapsed. Her body felt weightless and heavy at the same time. Weightless from exhaustion, heavy from everything she'd carried alone for far too long. I pulled her inside, shut the door, and locked it, though part of me knew no lock could keep out the kind of terror she brought with her. She clung to me with trembling fingers, her nails pressing into my arm, as if she feared I would disappear too. I guided her to the couch, but she couldn't sit up without shaking violently. Her hands kept clutching at her clothes, twisting the fabric as if the action grounded her. Her eyes, those familiar eyes identical to my own, looked unfocused, drifting to the corners of the room as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. It was the look of a hunted animal, a look I had never seen on her face in our entire lives. When I touched her shoulder gently, she recoiled with a sharp gasp, her entire body tightening like a bowstring. "Hey, hey," I said softly, trying to steady her, but she shook her head rapidly, her breath catching in her throat. She opened her mouth to speak, once, twice, but no words came out, only small, broken sounds, like pieces of sentences that didn't know how to form anymore. Minutes passed, or maybe it was longer. Time felt strange around her fear. Eventually, she leaned against me, letting out a sob so raw it sent a chill through my bones. I wrapped my arms around her, drawing slow circles on her back, trying to give her something solid to hold on to. "You're safe," I whispered, not knowing if that was true yet, but she shook her head again, more violently this time. "I can't go back," she breathed, the words fractured, as if escaping through cracks in her spirit. She said it again and again, each time more desperate, more final. I can't go back there." Her voice dissolved into tears, and she pressed her forehead to my shoulder, trembling uncontrollably. Hearing those words, spoken with a certainty that felt like a death sentence, told me more than any explanation could have. She didn't just fear going back. She believed going back would end her. As I held her, I started noticing the smaller things. Her wrists, red and irritated, as if she'd been gripping something too tightly, or someone had gripped her. The faint discoloration on her upper arm, shaped like fingers. A rip on the side of her shirt, small but telling, bruises half hidden behind her ear. They weren't the kind of marks you get from accidents. They were the kind that come from being controlled, restrained, silenced. My chest tightened with an anger I hadn't felt in years. Not hot anger, the cold kind. The kind that spreads slowly like frost, turning clarity into weaponry. But I didn't let her see that yet. She had enough to carry. She curled into herself as the tremors continued. And then, slowly, she began to speak. Not in full sentences. Not in a coherent story. Trauma never tells its truth in order. Instead, it leaks out in fragments, shards of memory sharp enough to cut through the air. She spoke of feeling observed all the time, of rules that didn't sound like rules until you broke them, of subtle corrections disguised as affection, of routines so strict they suffocated every part of her day, of him, always him, asking questions not to understand, but to monitor, to measure, to control. She talked about how he used to smile in public, how everyone adored him, how he seemed gentle, attentive, helpful, how he played the part of the perfect man so flawlessly that even she believed it at first. But behind closed doors, that smile twisted, the tone changed, the warmth cooled. He didn't need to yell. He had a quieter cruelty, one that didn't leave bruises at first, one that chipped away at her confidence one correction, one sigh, one disappointed glance at a time. She said she stopped choosing her own clothes because he had better taste. She stopped speaking up because he didn't like interruptions. She stopped seeing her friends because they were a distraction. She stopped calling me because she didn't want to make him think she didn't appreciate him. She stopped being herself because he didn't allow her to exist. As she spoke, I realized something horrifying. I hadn't lost my sister recently. I had been losing her slowly, bit by bit, for years. The woman in front of me wasn't just frightened, she was hollowed out, carved open by someone who knew exactly how to break a person without leaving visible scars. At one point, she looked up at me, eyes shining with tears, and whispered, "I'm sorry." I asked what she could possibly be sorry for, and she said, "For not seeing it sooner, for staying, for letting it get this far." That was the moment I felt something inside me ignite. Not anger this time, but resolve. A deep, unwavering resolve that settled in my bones. She wasn't apologizing because she did something wrong. She was apologizing because she was conditioned to believe everything was her fault, and I wasn't going to let that continue. I held her face gently, lifting her chin so her eyes met mine. "You don't need to go back," I told her. "Not now. Not ever." She broke again, letting out another sob. But there was something different this time. A small flicker of relief, of belief, of hope. But hope is fragile when fear has lived longer. And I knew deep down that if I wanted to protect her, truly protect her, I had to do something drastic, something beyond typical help, something beyond comfort, because the man she escaped from wasn't just cruel. He was observant, calculating, precise. And he would notice she was gone. He would come looking. That realization settled over me like a shadow stretching across the room. She wasn't just running from him. She was running from a man who believed he owned her. Men like that don't let go willingly. And that's when the idea formed. Not all at once, but as a slow, terrifying understanding. An understanding that the only way to pull her out of this nightmare completely was to step into it myself. Not temporarily, not symbolically, literally. I would have to become her, enter her house, stand where she stood, face the man who broke her, and dismantle him from the inside. But I didn't tell her that yet, because I knew the truth. The moment she understood what I planned to do, she would try to stop me. I sat there with her trembling against my shoulder, and the idea kept growing silently inside me, spreading like a shadow swelling beneath a door. It wasn't a simple idea. It wasn't even a conscious decision at first. It was instinct. The kind of instinct that rises up when you realize someone you love is cornered by something they can't outrun. I kept replaying her words, the way her voice cracked when she said she couldn't go back, the haunted look in her eyes when she described his presence in the house. And suddenly, I wasn't just holding her. I was holding the weight of everything he had stolen from her, the spark she used to have, the laughter that used to come effortlessly, the woman she used to be before him. It all flickered behind my eyes like a montage of memories I didn't realize I would miss until they were gone. She eventually fell asleep on the couch, exhaustion pulling her under like a slow tide. I stayed awake beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, listening to the faint sounds of her fragile sleep, tiny gasps, sharp breaths, the kind that told me her body was still fighting the fear even in dreams. Every movement she made seemed like a reflection of something deeper, something still chasing her in the shadows of her mind. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and felt my jaw tighten when I saw the faint marks on her neck. Not bruises, exactly. More like the ghosts of hands that once claimed ownership. The house was dim, quiet, but my mind wasn't. It was racing, spinning, building. The more I thought about him, the more the idea hardened. I saw his face the way she described his quiet anger, his eyes measuring her, his voice correcting her like she was a malfunctioning device instead of a human being. I imagined him pacing around that pristine house, inspecting everything she touched, every step she took. I imagined him calling her phone, confused when she didn't answer. I imagined him walking through his perfectly controlled world and noticing the smallest detail out of place, her silence. He would come looking. That wasn't a possibility. It was a certainty. And if he found her here, weak, terrified, unable to defend herself, he would drag her back into the cage she barely escaped. Maybe this time she wouldn't make it out again. The idea struck me harder, sharper, clearer. I had something she didn't have anymore. Strength, clarity, and the ability to fight back without fear of breaking. But more importantly, we had something that most people never do: identical faces, identical voices, identical presence. And unlike her, I wasn't conditioned to bow under his stare. I walked to the kitchen, pacing slowly, letting the thought breathe. Each time I tried to shake it off, it returned bigger, louder, more confident. The more I tried to think of alternatives, the more I realized there weren't any, not ones that would keep her safe anyway. He wasn't the type of man you could simply avoid. He was the type who followed, who clung, who possessed, who believed he owned the world around him, and God help anyone who dared escape it. The clock ticked quietly in the background, each second like a countdown. And as I watched my sister sleeping, curled into herself like she was trying to disappear, I felt the shift inside me fully, a clarity that didn't feel like bravery. It felt like inevitability. When she finally stirred awake in the soft light of early dawn, her eyes still swollen, her body still exhausted, I sat beside her. She blinked at me with confusion first, then fear, then something like shame. And before she could apologize again for existing, I told her everything. I laid out the idea, the insane, reckless, dangerous idea. I would go back to her house pretending to be her. I would take her place long enough to understand him, to control the situation, to protect her from the inside. I would study him the way he studied her. I would learn his weaknesses the way he exploited hers. And I would dismantle him from within his own world. She stared at me like I had lost my mind. "No," she whispered immediately, shaking her head hard. "You don't understand him." Her hands began to shake again, and she grabbed my arm. "You can't go there. You can't. He'll see through you. He'll hurt you. She choked on the last word, swallowing it like poison, but I wasn't afraid. Not of him. Not anymore. She had lived in fear long enough. It was my turn to carry the weight. I took her shaking hands into mine and looked deeply into her eyes. "He won't know," I said, "because he never saw you." Her breath caught, her lips parting as if she wanted to deny it, but couldn't. "He never looked at you," I continued softly. "He looked at the version of you he created. He won't see the difference." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, filled with truth she didn't want to accept. She started to cry again, not because she wanted to stop me, but because part of her knew I was right, because she knew he had never truly recognized her soul, only her obedience, her compliance, her silence. And that realization hurt her more than any bruise on her skin ever could. The next hours were spent in preparation, not dramatic, Hollywood-style preparation, something far more intimate, more painful, more real. She showed me how she held herself when he walked into the room, shoulders slightly slumped, chin lowered a few degrees, eyes soft and cautious. She showed me how she sat at the table, always perfectly still, hands placed in her lap unless instructed otherwise. She walked me through her morning routine with mechanical precision, from the way she folded the blankets to the exact speed she used when making coffee for him. None of it was accidental. Everything had been trained into her, conditioning wrapped in routine. She taught me how to control my breathing when his voice changed, how she inhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, trying not to provoke him. She taught me the phrases she used to de-escalate his moods. "I understand. You're right. I'll fix it." Words carved into her like scars. Watching her demonstrate these behaviors was like witnessing the life drain from her body in slow motion. She wasn't acting. She was remembering, repeating, re-experiencing. There were moments where she had to stop and steady herself, gripping the edge of the table because reliving the motion brought back memories too painful to hide. I realized then that she hadn't just been controlled, she had been rewritten. By the time she finished explaining everything, the daylight had expanded into a pale golden wash through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. She stood there, arms wrapped tightly around herself, looking at me with an expression that tore me apart. Fear, love, regret, hope, all tangled together. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "I do," I said, not with bravado, not with impulsiveness, with certainty, because I knew that if I didn't step into her life for a few hours, she would end up stepping back into his for a lifetime. When it was time to leave, she walked me to the door slowly, her steps hesitant. Her fingers brushed my sleeve one last time, a silent plea for me to stay. But I squeezed her hand gently and whispered, "Trust me." Then I walked out of the house, into the cool morning air, carrying her fear on my shoulders like armor. The world outside felt normal. Cars passed, birds sang, neighbors watered gardens. The sun rose like it did every day. But inside me, something else rose, resolve, a fierce, unyielding resolve to protect her no matter the cost. When I reached her house, I stopped at the gate, staring at the place she once called home. From the outside, it looked peaceful, charming, inviting, the kind of house couples dream of. But I knew better now. I knew what lived inside those walls. A presence, a power, a tightening grip disguised as love. I breathed deeply, squared my shoulders, lowered my chin just slightly, the way she did, and stepped inside her world. The moment the door closed behind me, I understood everything she couldn't find the words to say. This house wasn't a home. It was a cage, a beautifully constructed, carefully curated, perfectly maintained prison built by a man who believed that control was the highest form of affection. And I was walking straight into the lion's den disguised as the lamb he thought he owned. The second I stepped deeper into her house, something inside me tightened like a knot being pulled from both ends. It wasn't just the silence, though that alone felt suffocating. It was the precision of everything around me, the immaculate placement of objects, the rigid symmetry, the faint scent of disinfectant mixed with something floral and artificial. The air felt rehearsed, like every particle was afraid to be out of place. I walked slowly, letting my eyes absorb the environment the same way she once had. Hyper-aware, cautious, looking for the slightest sign of danger the way prey senses a predator long before it appears. My footsteps echoed softly across the hardwood floors, as though the house was listening, evaluating the sound, weighing whether I moved lightly enough, quietly enough. I imagined her walking here, her shoulders small, her steps careful, her breathing shallow, trying to fit into a mold someone else carved for her. That thought made my chest burn with a quiet fury that simmered under my ribs like rising smoke. Then I started noticing the details that shouldn't stand out but did. A tiny smudge on a picture frame, but only on one side. A decorative bowl on the entry table turned a few millimeters too far. A throw blanket folded with militant precision. The smallest imperfections felt like alarms, traps, tests. I felt my pulse quicken as I realized he wasn't just controlling. He was measuring her with a level of detail that bordered on ritualistic obsession. I moved into the living room, trying to mimic her movements, letting my posture shrink the way she had shown me. The weight of her habits settled onto my body like a costume stitched not from fabric, but from fear. I let my fingers hover over the armrest of the couch, remembering how she said she never sat fully back unless he invited her to. She always sat on the edge, alert, ready. No home should make someone feel like a soldier waiting for orders. But this place had been sculpted around that tension. Just as I was beginning to absorb the strangled rhythm of the house, I heard the faint hum of a car engine approaching. My heart clenched. I hadn't realized how fast time passed. Or maybe I had underestimated how predictable his routine was. Tires touched the driveway. A car door opened. Slow, deliberate footsteps approached the entrance. The metallic jingle of keys cut through the silence like a blade. I wasn't ready, but I had no choice except to be ready. The door opened, the hinges moving with a softness that felt almost rehearsed. He walked in with a confidence that made the air tighten. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He stepped inside like a king returning to his kingdom, certain that everything and everyone inside belonged to him. When his eyes found me, standing exactly where she would stand, the temperature in the room shifted, not colder, sharper, as if the air had become glass. His smile was small, polite, almost warm, but emptier than hollow wood. "You're home early," he said. But it wasn't an observation. It was a probe, a measurement, a test. I lowered my gaze, letting my shoulders slope slightly. "I wasn't feeling well," I said softly, using the tone she had taught me. Careful, controlled, not too weak, not too confident. I felt him watching me the way a scientist watches an experiment under glass. He placed his keys on the table with a soft click that echoed in the room like a gavel, punishment disguised as routine. He walked past me at first, not touching, not speaking, but his presence lingered like static electricity. I could feel him evaluating me, checking my movements against the version of her he believed he had perfected. His eyes followed me with quiet suspicion, the kind that coils around your throat without ever making contact. "Did you finish everything for today?" he asked casually, but his voice betrayed the tiniest shift, an undercurrent of control wrapped in honey. I nodded without looking up. "Yes." He narrowed his eyes, studying my posture. "You don't sound certain." My heart stumbled in my chest. Was my tone off? Did I respond too quickly? Too slowly? Too evenly? I forced myself to exhale through my nose the way she did when she was nervous. "I did," I repeated, this time softer, slightly shaky. He nodded, briefly, reluctantly, and walked into the kitchen. I followed him with my eyes, careful not to seem like I was watching. He opened a drawer, then a cabinet, scanning the placement of items. When I saw his shoulders stiffen slightly, I knew he had noticed the difference. The mug I intentionally left facing the wrong direction. He didn't comment. Not yet. He closed the cabinet quietly, almost gently, but the silence he left behind was louder than a shout. Minutes stretched like hours as he moved around the house inspecting small details. A picture frame angled slightly differently. A chair not pulled in precisely as he expected. A towel folded one crease off. I could see the calculations behind his eyes. This wasn't a man reacting. This was a man detecting, decoding, unraveling. When he returned to the living room, he stood in front of me. Too close. Close enough that the faint scent of his cologne, clean but cold, filled my nose. He tilted his head just a little, searching my face for something. For fear? For obedience? For submission. "You're different today," he said slowly. Not a question. A warning. I forced myself to swallow, to mimic the nervous gesture my sister made when she didn't know what answer to give. "I'm just tired," I whispered. He replied, unconvinced. There was a long, heavy silence, the kind that presses against your skull, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. Then, suddenly, he smiled. A small, controlled smile that felt like a mask sliding into place. "Come," he said. He led me toward the dining table, not touching, but expecting me to follow. I did. He pulled out a chair for me, not out of courtesy, but out of choreography. He needed me exactly where he wanted me. I sat carefully, adjusting my posture the way she showed me, hands perfectly still in my lap. He watched every movement, analyzing, dissecting, comparing. "How was your day?" he asked, but his tone held no interest. It was an interrogation through a disguise. "It was fine," I answered. Too quick. I felt it instantly. He felt it too. His eyes narrowed. He leaned back slowly, folding his arms. He didn't speak for several seconds, and those seconds clawed at my nerves like invisible fingers. He was waiting for something, for me to crack, to stumble, to reveal the truth he sensed but couldn't articulate yet. Then he leaned in, close, too close. His voice lowered. "You're lying." My pulse froze. But before I could respond, before I could piece together any explanation, the sound of a fork clattering in the sink saved me. He looked toward the kitchen and stood abruptly. "Stay here," he said, as if I were a child. He walked away, giving me a few seconds. Seconds I needed to steady myself. I inhaled slowly, deliberately, grounding myself behind the disguise I had stepped into. But as I tried to regain control of the moment, I began noticing things she hadn't told me, or maybe things she couldn't. In the corner of the dining room, a chair leg had been sanded down, smoothed repeatedly in one spot, like someone had rubbed it obsessively when anxious. On the wall near the hallway, barely visible unless you were looking for it, were faint indentations at hand height, marks of pressure, maybe where she braced herself during moments of panic. Details that told the story her voice had been too broken to speak. And then I heard his footsteps returning. The moment he re-entered the room, something had shifted in him. His expression was harder, more focused. Suspicion sharpened into something else. Possession. He sat across from me slowly, folding his hands together on the table, his eyes locked directly onto mine. And then, with chilling calmness, he said, "Tell me who you really are." My entire body chilled. The room froze. The air thinned. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper coated in venom. "Because my wife doesn't look at me like that." I didn't realize I had met his gaze fully, something she almost never did. I had slipped, and he saw it. He rose abruptly, his chair scraping violently against the floor, the sound piercing enough to shoot straight up my spine. He approached me slowly, each step deliberate. Every bit of his charm evaporated. What remained was raw, silent rage, the kind that had destroyed her piece by piece. He reached out sharply and grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to leave an immediate bruise, but hard enough to tell me exactly what he was capable of. His fingers tightened as he hissed, "Who are you?" I felt my breath tremble, but I didn't break. Slowly, with unwavering calm, I lifted my chin, and I looked him in the eyes. "I am not her," I said softly. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Then, like lightning hitting dry earth, his expression contorted. And before he could react, before the rage could erupt, before anything else could unravel, the front door opened, and my sister walked in. When my sister stepped through that door, time fractured into pieces. The house, once suffocating with silent menace, suddenly pulsed with a new tension, a collision of past and present. of terror and truth. She froze in the doorway, her breath catching mid-inhale. Her eyes darted between him, towering, furious, and me, standing in the place she once filled, wearing the fear she once carried. She looked like someone who had wandered into the moment she had spent years running from. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She wasn't just scared. She was stunned, shocked, horrified, confused. But then something else flickered across her expression. Recognition. Not of the situation, but of herself reflected in me. For the first time, she saw what she looked like when she lived here. And the realization hit her so hard that tears welled instantly in her eyes. He turned toward her slowly, his face twisting with a fury that revealed everything he had ever hidden. Gone was the charming facade, the polite mask. What remained was the raw truth, ugly, venomous, combustible. "What is this?" he spat, pointing toward me as if I were an intruder in his kingdom. "What kind of sick joke are you playing?" My sister took a trembling step inside, then another. Her knees wobbled, but she kept going. "Stop," she whispered, her voice cracking like thin glass. "Stop talking to her like that." He laughed, harsh, cruel, like someone humored by a child's attempt to fight a hurricane. "You think you can walk out for one night and come back with reinforcements?" He gestured toward me. "Did you think bringing your double would—" "She's not my double," she said shakily. "She's my sister." He stared at her, confused for only a second before the realization struck. His face contorted in shock, then humiliation, then uncontrollable rage. "You switched," he demanded. "You pretended to be—" But he cut himself off, snarling. "How dare you? How dare you mock me like this?" Mock. As if everything he had done to her had been nothing more than a game he expected her to keep playing. He turned toward me again, his eyes narrowed to thin slits. "So that's why you've been acting strange." His voice oozed with threat. He stepped forward, his movements rigid and dangerous. "You think you can outsmart me?" He reached for me again, but before he could touch me, my sister screamed, "Stop!" It was the loudest sound I had ever heard from her, a cry ripped from a place she had buried for years. He stopped, not because he respected her voice, but because it startled him. He wasn't used to hearing her speak above a whisper, certainly not like that. That scream, desperate, broken, defiant, shook something loose inside both of us. She stumbled forward, tears streaming down her face, but her jaw tightened with a determination I had never seen in her. "Don't touch her," she sobbed. "Don't you dare touch her." He scoffed, but his posture shifted. "You don't get to make demands," he growled. "Not here. Not in my house." "This isn't your house," she whispered. "Not anymore." His face reddened, veins rising on his neck. "Everything in this house is mine, including you." "No," I said sharply, stepping between them. "She doesn't belong to you." He laughed again, but it was different now. A laugh tinged with desperation. "You think anyone will believe you," he hissed. "You think the world will listen to a broken woman and her sister who pretended to be someone she's not?" My sister flinched, but she didn't back down. "I'm not broken," she whispered, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Not anymore." He lunged toward her. I stepped in front of her. He grabbed my arm, squeezing so hard pain shot up to my shoulder. But before he could do more, before he could twist my wrist or yank me closer or unleash the full force of his rage, a voice thundered from the doorway. "Police! Let her go!" He froze. Not in fear, in disbelief. Officers flooded into the entryway, commanding him to step back. He loosened his grip just enough for me to pull away. He started shouting then, rambling, stammering, clinging to whatever lies he could conjure. "There's been a mistake. I don't know what she told you. She's unstable. She needs help." My sister, trembling but breathing, stepped forward. "I'm the one who called," she said softly. Her voice wavered, but she spoke with clarity. "I told them everything." He turned toward her slowly, the betrayal etched deep into his expression. "You did this," he whispered. "You brought them here." She nodded once, a small nod, but it was everything. The officers read him his rights. He shouted her name, then mine, then incoherent rage. He thrashed, tried to pull away, tried to twist free, but the cuffs held him firmly. The house, his kingdom, echoed with the sound of him being dragged out. And for the first time, there was peace. When the door shut behind them, my sister crumpled to her knees. I dropped down beside her, wrapping her in my arms as her sobs filled the now empty house. Not terrified sobs, not hopeless ones, sobs of release, Sobs of a weight finally being lifted. Sobs of a person waking up from a nightmare they survived far too long. We stayed like that for a long time, the silence slowly returning, not suffocating, but cleansing. Sunlight filtered through the windows, warming the floor. The house no longer felt cold, no longer felt haunted, no longer felt like his. It felt empty, but in a good way, like something poisonous had been removed. Healing took months. Real healing. Not just breathing easier, not just sleeping safely, but rediscovering herself after years of being erased. She had nightmares at first, shaking, sweating, waking up, gasping for air. She apologized constantly, even for things that weren't hers to apologize for. She second-guessed every decision, every thought, every opinion. She walked like someone afraid the floor might collapse. But slowly, piece by piece, she changed. The first time she laughed, really laughed, it startled both of us. The sound was unfamiliar, rusty, like something that needed practice to regain its full tone, but it came back, stronger each time. She started wearing the clothes she liked, cooking meals she missed, walking outside at night without checking over her shoulder, making plans, smiling, living, choosing, breathing. She wasn't the same woman she was before him. She was better, stronger, wiser. And one day, she took my hands and whispered, "Thank you." But I shook my head, because this wasn't my victory. It was hers. The courage had always been inside her. She just needed someone to step into the fire with her long enough for her to walk out on her own. Now I want to ask you, the one listening to this story, how many people around you might be suffering in silence? How many lives look perfect from the outside but feel like prisons on the inside? How many times have you ignored a small sign, an unusual silence, a distant expression, a change in someone's voice, because you assumed everything was fine? And if it were you, would you speak up? Would you ask for help? Would you walk out? Or would you stay quiet like my sister once did, hoping things would magically get better? If this story touched you in any way, if it made your heart tighten or your mind wander to someone you know, leave a comment. Let me know what city you're watching from. You never know who your words might comfort. You never know who might feel less alone because of your voice. And before you go, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Not for numbers, not for the algorithm, but because stories like this need to be heard. They save people. They open eyes. They bring courage to those who think they've lost theirs. Stay with me. There are many more stories to tell. And you're part of every single one.